everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. For those of you just joining, we will spend about a minute here while we wait for everyone to get joined in from the waiting room. That always takes a little bit. We do have a poll here for you today. So if you could just take a second to give us an answer in there, that'd be really helpful for us. And we will chat about the answers here as we move on. Since today's talk is all about Gartner and the hype cycle, kind of curious of which of these top, what are your top three out of this list of emerging technologies that's going to be most important to your team in the next 2 years? So yeah, if you could just give us a check there on those top three choices that you have. But kind of curious to see what's going on for y'all in your environments and what's of interest for you. We will just hang out here for a few more seconds while we give everyone a chance to join, for those of you that are just joining. So good to see so many of you out there. As always, we like to see large groups here joining NTC webinars, so thank you for that. And we do have a pretty interesting one today. It's kind of different from our usual webinar where we're going to be talking about the Gartner world here as opposed to our very typical, very technical talks. So interesting one we've got for you today. All right, I think that is probably pretty good for us. We've waited about a minute. Looks like we've kind of stabilized on the waiting room there. So we're going to go ahead and get started on the webinar here for today. And today we're going to be talking about Gartner, basically inside the 2025 Gartner Hype Cycle for enterprise networking. What's real and what's coming up next? Before we get started, just some quick introductions. My name is Tim Schreyack, and joining me is also
Tim Fiola.
So we got the two Tims here. If you've ever seen our Automation Loop series as well, you can enjoy that, and you can see us interacting there on our podcast as well. A quick couple of things as we look at the agenda here today. We're going to go through and understanding what the hype cycle is. We're going to do a deep dive into some of those key innovations that they've mentioned in the hype cycle. We'll take a look at how Nautobot aligns to those key innovations and how you can use it as your foundation to develop onto those ideas. And of course, always time for Q&A and any takeaways we'll have here at the end for you, including some links to all things that are relevant. A couple of housekeeping items. One, you will notice that the chat is disabled, so please do use the Q&A for any questions that you have for us. That helps us to track those questions and make sure we get answers out to you and that we can share those answers with everybody here in the webinar. As well as please use the reaction button that you will find down near the bottom of the screen. It's really helpful for us to understand things that are of interest to you so that we can kind of interact with you and understand what you're lighting up on as we go through the conversation. So just keep those things in mind as we go through. And of course, feel free to fire away those questions throughout the presentation. That's sometimes the better thing to do is say, hey, you have a question in your mind, just put it up into the Q&A real quick, and we will get to it at the end as we move through. So don't worry there. With that, let's dive in. So understanding the hype cycle. Today, we're going to go look at the most recent hype cycle report, the 2025 hype cycle for enterprise networks. But first, we just want to take a minute to explain what the hype cycle actually is, what does it mean for leaders and teams like yours, and how can you use hype cycles to get some of the best industry analyst research on emerging technologies that matter to you or those that should. So let's dive in. So why does this matter? What's important out of the hype cycle and really what's some of the interesting things that we see here. So as we start on the top left there, right, we identify key innovations. The hype cycle helps us to spot emerging trends that are shaping enterprise networking. And this is really a key thing. The Gartner analysts are out there looking and understanding what's coming up next and helping us to be informed of where we see the industry going, as well as kind of just general trends. As we move across the screen here, we see informing strategic investments. We can use this to help us with planning. So we can align our investments to our long-term networking goals. So we can make better decisions and we can plan better for the future. And then as we look at that third item, they're really separating hype from reality. And I think this is a key element of the hype cycle report, is helping us understand which technologies deliver real value versus those that are just hype. And Tim's going to take over the last three here for us as we go through the bottom side of the slides.
Thanks, Tim. On the bottom left there, the Gartner Hype Cycle report, it supports innovation roadmaps. How do I, as a leader, map my technology adoption to my business priorities? What technologies are out there and what value do they provide? This report helps me understand that better. it can guide my risk management, meaning I can anticipate the challenges of perhaps adopting an early phase technology versus adopting a more mature technology. Now, the opposite side of that is competitive advantage. If I choose to stay with more established, mature technologies, and my competitors, I know my competitors are out there leveraging and experimenting with technologies that are earlier in the life cycle, they may eventually be able to outcompete me. So I have to balance my risk management versus my need to compete. This Gartner report helps me understand that trifecta of items as well. Okay. And now let's look at the hype versus the long-term impact. When you look at the hype cycle, it's important to understand it's really looking at two different concepts, hype and long-term impact. And it's important to separate the two. Hype deals with the initial excitement around emerging technologies. Think all the media buzz, the marketing, the pilot projects, and the communication from the early adopters. Trends here, when you see this, can feel very urgent. You might have a period of FOMO, fear of missing out, during this hype period. But these projects often overpromise in the short term. Then you have the long-term impact. This is the lasting value that a technology delivers once it's mature. So not every hyped technology will go on to deliver long-term impact, but the ones that do can be transformative. And they can transform your business locally, or they can transform the whole industry space you're competing in. So when you look at the hype cycle, we're not just seeing what's trendy, we're also evaluating which technologies are likely to matter and provide value back to your business over the long term. Okay. Now, it's important to understand that it's important to understand the life cycle, the stages of the life cycle that the Gartner report maps. So we're going to go through those now, and then we're going to take a look at the report. The innovation trigger phase. This is where a breakthrough or new concept sparks interest. Early pilots begin, but real practical implementations are where it's typically very experimental. The marketing here, though, leads us to the peak of inflated expectations. This is where excitement peaks. Everyone's talking about it, but few projects are living up to the hype. FOMO is at a maximum here because you're hearing so much about it from the marketing and the people trying to gain publicity for what they've done with this new technology. That inevitably leads to the trough of disillusionment. This is where reality really sets in. Many initial implementations have failed or underdelivered, and interest is probably going to decline sharply. In fact, some people may declare a technology dead in the trough of disillusionment, but work continues. After the trough of disillusionment, people are still working with the technology. The organizations are learning how to leverage the technology effectively, including understanding the use cases better and tuning the technology to match those use cases. And then finally, the plateau of productivity. This is where the technology is matured substantially, it scales well, and it's key here, delivers real business value over the long term. So understanding which phase the technology is in can help you as a technology leader understand how to invest. Do I invest carefully? Do I invest fully? Or do I wait till the technology is a bit more mature?
So now that we understand why this report matters and the difference between hype and long-term impact in these maturity phases, let's take a look at the 2025 Gartner Hype Cycle for enterprise networking. So if we note here at the bottom, you will notice a couple of interesting things as we look at this graph. First, you'll notice where that plateau will be reached in, right? That element there, those colors, when we were reviewing this, is something that I didn't actually pick up on at first, is that the dots for each of the technologies there give you an indication of when Gartner is predicting this particular technology to reach the plateau where that is becoming productivity. And so this is really important for us to think about as we look at these, where Gartner is really giving us this prediction of how close is this to reality. So very important here, right? As we think about the idea of network automation specifically, we're looking particularly at network automation tools that help automate provisioning, configuration, troubleshooting, operations and maintenance, validation, and reporting of network components. Now, another interesting thing that happened when we first looked at this report and we were going over it internally is that we were saying, hey, network automation has left the hype cycle. Very interesting point. But then one of our fellow engineers was looking at it and said, hey, but it's still on here. And we said, what do you mean? And he's like, well, look, NetDevOps is right there in the innovation trigger. It's still right here in NetDevOps. And we said, so this is where Gartner is actually making a distinction between NetDevOps and network automation. And Tim, do you want to give us a little indication there as kind of what is the difference between NetDevOps and network automation?
Yeah, we're going to go into this a little bit more in a couple slides, but NetDevOps is going to deal with in general, it's going to deal with the how. Network automation is the what. NetDevOps is the how do we practice? How do we do our development with network automation? So it's a difference between the what and the how. It's a nuanced difference, but it's very important one. We're going to explore that a bit further as we go through this.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, something that the way that I think about this is that network automation is something that you do. NetDevOps is in a way that you approach problems and the way that you approach philosophically the way I want to solve a problem. And it's really a mentality, and it does require a paradigm shift for the team and the organization to transition into NetDevOps. You can implement network automation without that kind of paradigm shift. But NetDevOps absolutely requires that concept there.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Tim, how network automation it's left the hype cycle, which doesn't mean it's finished. It just means it's more broadly recognized, past the hype peak, and it's moving into mainstream adoption. But for many enterprises, it's still a journey. And you and I were talking a couple weeks ago on the automation loop. The question now is less about, that we get from leadership at least, is less about why should I automate? Now they're asking us, how should I automate effectively? And that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen is that many enterprises know that they need a lot of these capabilities that are listed here, but they don't know, how do I equate this with automation? Automation is everywhere in a modern network, but how are those capabilities actually delivered, right? So really understanding first the concept, but then the actual technologies that begin to deliver those ideas.
Absolutely.
So let's take a deep dive into those key innovations and take a look at those 4 key themes that we mentioned early on. But before we do that, we want to kind of see, how did you all align to those ideas? So if we could bring the poll back here, we're going to see kind of what's lighting up for you all. So this is, I think, this is actually really interesting to me, that we're seeing. The reason I say that is, if you have been to any conference recently, there are 2 things that are really, really lighting up conferences right now. And one is AI, and the other is the digital twin. And what you all just said is that, hey, we're hearing the AI thing, but we're not so much hearing the digital twin thing. And I think that's really interesting. That we've got 75% of you roughly on agentic NetOps and network AI assistance, and only 37% of you lighting up on the digital twin. So I think that's kind of interesting, just that difference there between what's happening on the marketing front versus what you all are saying from a practical perspective. Tim, do you have any comments there?
Well, I'm looking at the NetDevOps, 63%. That's a surprisingly big number, and we're going to go into this a bit more as to why I think that's surprising. But NetDevOps generally is a cultural change, and to see this high of a rating for that's interesting to me, and I want to explore that further when we later on in this show here.
And I would actually be interested for any of you all that put NetDevOps as something that you're lighting up on there. You see that as something for the next 2 years. Could you give us any feedback on what are you doing to enable your team to take that paradigm shift, to enable this concept within the organization? Because at least from my experience, most network organizations are not prepared for this paradigm shift that is required as we move into NetDevOps. And as well as, do you have the foundation laid? Do you have in your source of truth and your network automation tools built on top of which you can build your NetDevOps solution? So kind of curious to see how you look at that, as well as we're going to go into some of those topics coming up here as well as we move further on into the webinar today. So great responses to the webinar. Thank you for that. Really interesting as we look at that. So out of those 30 technologies that we saw on the hype cycle for 2025, which are worth watching. So we're going to break down our favorites that we saw out of this list here that we think are of interest, right? So if you think of the foundation of modern network innovation, it is absolutely a network source of truth. You cannot innovate on top of your network without an accurate, up-to-date source of truth. So this is where a tool like Nautobot comes in, providing that capability, centralizing your authoritative network data, and offering you flexible automation framework to simplify the adoption of these new technologies. So as the industry evolves, emerging technologies are increasingly designed to integrate with such automation frameworks. So before we dive into a few of these technologies, let's just take a look at how such a platform applies. And as we keep an eye on this, we're going to think about these orange badges that we have across the lower left of the screen here. These are the areas where Nautobot and its capabilities align to the things that we see coming out of the hype cycle. So we'll apply those as we look across the next few slides and we look at these different technologies. Where do those mean in practice? Hey, we see the thing coming from Gartner and our advisors. Now, what does that mean in actual practice? How do we implement these ideas? So first thing we're going to take a look at is NetDevOps, right? Current position on the hype cycle is innovation trigger. So what do we see by that? First of all, it's predicted by Gartner to become into that plateau of productivity. That means it's hitting that mainstream stride. It's left the hype cycle in 2 to 5 years. So it's coming pretty soon. It's not that far out. Which is kind of an interesting thing to think about, particularly when you look at something like our network digital twin that is actually much further out, right? And so even that's kind of aligning with your responses as well. Hey, NetDevOps is coming soon. We see other things taking a little bit longer. So are you prepared for that? Are you ready to implement NetDevOps in your environment? That's really an important thing to think about because as we think about what NetDevOps is, it's taking this idea of DevOps and applying those principles of automation, CI/CD, and network programmability to our manual processes that we currently do today, bringing us with an agile, reliable operations method. This is a very different way from the way that we think today. And this is something that really is important as we move to the future. And Tim's going to give us a little bit insight into why does that matter?
Yeah, Tim, this matters because when you look at the why it matters right down there, we see things like boosting network agility, your ability to adapt to changes in the network, reducing errors, speeding application delivery. These are all rolling up in strategic objectives, typically that enterprises have. And you're doing that by treating network infrastructure like code. There's some good buzzwords for you. But this last statement really resonated with me. Enabling better collaboration between network and software teams. And I alluded to this before. NetDevOps is how you go about network automation. It's one of the ways you can go about network automation. And it gives a framework for the network team and the development team, the software team, to better collaborate. And this is really interesting to me for a couple reasons. First of all, this is not a product you can buy. A vendor is not selling NetDevOps. NetDevOps is how you do business. And it changes what you do on a day-to-day basis, not just horizontally throughout your organization, but also vertically. Management has to be bought in and aligned. And that is a lot of what we call cultural change. I don't go against the Gartner predictions typically at all, but this one really resonated with me. Since this is such a big cultural change, it's changing how we do business, how we go about our daily lives at work. My prediction here is that this is going to take more like 7 to 10 years to get to the plateau of productivity, because I think there's going to be a lot of cultural inertia and cultural resistance in especially larger enterprises where you have to change a lot of attitudes of a lot of people. I'm curious what you think about that.
I do know that I just set a timer for 7 years to check in and see how accurate your prediction was. So we'll know for sure. But yeah, I agree. And the reason I think that there may be some lag in implementation of NetDevOps is not because it's not a good technology or that it doesn't need to be in this plateau of productivity, but the fact more is that I think a lot of organizations are not prepared for NetDevOps, and that is, Gartner mentions this in the report that NetDevOps requires a highly accurate network source of truth. Now, here at Network to Code, one of the things that we do, and in fact, the primary thing that we do, is a network source of truth, and that's Nautobot. And we talk to, let's say, hundreds of clients a year across the gamut of verticals of all different sectors and organizations. And I have yet to meet one that prior to doing business with Network to Code had a highly accurate network source of truth. And this is a foundational component that is necessary before you can do NetDevOps. So this is what we were alluding to earlier in the talk, is that, hey, if you want to do NetDevOps, I fully support this concept, but are you prepared? Do you have your network source of truth in place that's accurate and kept up to date? Do you use it to drive network automation already? If you're not doing those things, those are your first steps. So that's where you need to start, and you need to get that done in the next year or 5, depending on where you look at the NetDevOps coming out of the hype cycle, and be ready to actually embrace this idea of NetDevOps. Prior to that, I think this is really a key element to understand that, hey, it's one thing to see it on the chart here, but it's a whole nother thing to actually put it into practice and take that journey as we move forward.
Yeah, and we're gonna bring this theme up a few times throughout this webinar. But clean data is a strategic asset, and it unlocks so many other technologies. But in order to really leverage them and to unlock them, you need clean data. Nautobot is the clean data source. Nautobot gives you data that's accessible, it's validated, it's accessible, validated, and usable by the automation. If you have those things, a lot of these technological innovations become much more usable to you. And I also want to touch on on my initial thoughts there, Tim. I said generally 7 to 10 years for kind of mainstream adoption to get to that plateau. However, here at Network to Code, we've helped enterprises get there sooner. We've often helped enterprises get there in 2 to 3 years, but it does require outside help. Oftentimes, there's just not the agents of change within a larger enterprise to have this happen organically. With outside help, you can get there sooner, but it does often require outside help. That is also something we do, how we add value to enterprises. We can get them along this path sooner to get you in your enterprise to the plateau of innovation much quicker.
Yeah. My prediction, if I was going to make an additional one here, would be that I expect we're going to see NetDevOps spend quite a bit of time in the trough of disillusionment, because people are going to embrace it, they're going to attempt it, they're going to have not had their prerequisites done, they won't have that foundation laid, and they're going to be very disappointed with those efforts to convert to NetDevOps, and it's going to sink into that trough for, I'm predicting, quite a while, for organizations to finally realize that, oh, I need to go do all this pre-work before I can actually embrace these concepts. Just a quick highlight again, a bit about like how NTC and Nautobot really enables these concepts, as Tim was alluding to there, that idea of like, hey, we can accelerate this journey. But a key element there is this idea that in most organizations, data its purpose in life is documentation. And we all know that one thing engineers love doing, I think we mostly have managers here on the webinar today. So I'm sure, all of the folks on your team, their favorite thing to do is write documentation and create documentation, right? No, it's not. It's literally the last thing engineers ever do. And so this is something really key to understand as you think about, how do I get a network source of truth accurate and kept accurate throughout its life cycle? And what we say here at Network to Code is the way we solve that problem is that we don't treat data as documentation. We treat data as the way that we instantiate change. So if I want to create a change, I change the data first, and then my change flows into my environment. What happens when we do that is it means, A, I've shifted the way my engineers and my team thinks. Now they think data first. They think data is important. It's the way I manage my network. It's the way I manage my environment. And that really shifts this mentality, as well as changes data from documentation to actually use. And that is a key element. Engineers don't do things that aren't practical to their day-to-day lives. So we need to make data practical to their day-to-day life so that they will embrace it. We have to meet them where they are. We can't just tell them, we need you to do this, because you know they won't. No matter how much you shout at them, no matter how much you yell at them, it's not going to happen. Right? So that's the idea, right? Is we're here, and our approach is, let's make this practical. Let's make this actually something that engineers want to do and are able to consume.
Yep.
Key element of Nautobot and the network to code philosophy. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Yep. Oh, no problem. I just wanted to also point out in this year's report, network code, this goes to my earlier point, network code is recognized as a sample vendor in NetDevOps in this year's Gartner report. So we are recognized as someone who can get you to that plateau of productivity quicker. This is what we do. This is how we add value.
Yeah, so I think that's all we've got on NetDevOps. Feel free to fire away any questions that you might have on that topic there, or anything that we hit on as we went through there. Okay, we're going to move on to our network digital twins, which only 37% of you are interested in. So I think that's kind of interesting. And even Gartner's kind of agreeing there with us, where they're saying, hey, it's in the innovation trigger stage, but it's 5 to 10 years out. So even from the Gartner perspective, this is going to be a minute before we start to see this out in production. So, just for those maybe that aren't familiar here, like, what exactly is a network digital twin? It's a virtual model of your network that mirrors the topology, configurations, and behavior so that we can simulate, test, et cetera, predict changes safely. Now, at a high level, those are amazing. But Tim, kind of let's dive into why does that matter, and maybe why is it going to take 5 to 10 years before we start to see this in reality?
Yeah, let's break that down a bit. So we talked about network automation is the what. NetDevOps, we just talked about that. That's the how. And when you look inside the how, this is where the network digital twins fits in. This fits into NetDevOps because part of NetDevOps is our testing pipelines. And so this network digital twin would fit inside a testing pipeline. We want to make a change to the network, spin up a digital twin, test the change, validate the change. That gives you more assurance that that change is going to have the intended effect in your network. So there's that part of it. The other part of this is while it does reduce risk, Nautobot also plays a role here because Nautobot can help you spin up your digital twins. Nautobot holds data that describes the intended state. That is a great place to get the data from to spin up your digital twins. So the data in Nautobot, again, is strategic. In this case, it's letting you spin up a virtual environment in which you can test, in which you can do your pipeline testing in. This matters. The fact that it's so far out, my guess is that some of these network changes are very difficult to test. Oftentimes, firms are trying to emulate or simulate the behavior of the network, and the network is complex. So I imagine part of it is just that modeling the complexity of a large network in a smaller unit is hard to do. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think probably the reason for this is that most organizations do not have intended state for their network defined external to the network. And you really can't do a network digital twin if you don't have that. That is really, this is a core element of the DevOps philosophy, as well as why I think NetDevOps may take a bit longer as well, because in DevOps philosophy, one of the very key elements is that I never define the state of a thing on the thing itself. So that means I define what something should look like, whether that's a router or a switch or a server or anything, should be defined external to that device itself. So I need to maintain that definition of its configuration and what it looks like in some other tool. Now, this is the use case that Nautobot solves. Nautobot gives us a way to define intended state for network devices. But that is a really hard problem. And it's the reason why NetDevOps has lagged behind DevOps. DevOps is generally used for things like servers and storage and relatively simple things to configure. So if you think of your typical server, it's got a handful of ports on it, maybe 4, maybe 6 ports. And there's some basic information that I need to know to configure that base server, right? There isn't a lot of information contained there. When I think about the simplest network switch that exists in most networks, it has at a minimum 48 ports on it. And each of those ports has probably 10 to 20 items that need to be configured uniquely to that port based on its purpose in life. There is just a crazy amount of data that's needed to model a network device compared to any other item in our network, in our IT stack. And therefore, that means it's really a lot harder to create that intended state external to the network. And that's, I believe, why NetDevOps is lagging behind DevOps, and in turn, why it's going to take a while for network digital twins, because it's simply really hard to describe that intended state external to the network. Any follow-up comments before we move on?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I just want to say intended state is a very loaded term because which access are you operating on for that intended state?
Yeah, absolutely. Very difficult conversation, as well as a difficult concept to implement. Amazing on paper, much harder to actually implement in real life. Okay, now let's get into network AI assistance, which y'all were lighting up on as well. 75% of you saying yes, interested in network AI assistance. And as we see here, Gartner agreeing. Hey, less than 2 years, we're going to see this in the mainstream, reaching that plateau of productivity. Currently in the peak of inflated expectations. So we have very, very high expectations. We are probably going to hit a little bit of a trough here as we move into reality. And what we mean when we say, hey, network AI assistance, we're saying these are things that use AI and machine learning to provide our conversational, actionable insights and assist us with our network operations. Essentially, you can think of it as a chatbot that you can actually converse with in natural language, right? That's the main idea here. Tim, any thoughts on, kind of why does this matter and where do we see this going?
Yeah, it matters, Tim, because networks are incredibly complex. They're incredibly scaled, incredibly complex. We just talked about how hard it is to spin up digital twins because of that complexity. They're also hard to understand in the moment because of that complexity. These AI assistants, and I think this is why it's going to be 2 years right to the plateau, is because the AI assistants immediately give us a gateway to speak in plain English to a tool and have that tool give us back an answer in plain English. I don't have to look through, for example, 3 or 4 different systems to understand something about the network. That something can be explained to me by the AI. Now, there's some trade-offs there because AI sometimes can make mistakes. So I want to draw a line back to Nautobot here. If you are trying to understand what is the intended state of the network, a network AI assistant can access the information in Nautobot and get that to you. You don't even have to access Nautobot now. The AI assistant can use that source of truth as its source for the intended state data and just tell you what should that be. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, and even if you you might be using a public AI, whether that's ChatGPT or any Copilot, you name the AI, can absolutely interact with Nautobot if you permit those interactions. But we also have Nautobot GPT, which is something built by NTC, and it really builds on this thought process of leveraging the data model and all of the APIs that we have within the Nautobot model to give us detailed insights and reports, and even do things like say, hey, go create an Nautobot job for me. So maybe I have some particular task I need to go clean up some data, for example. I could ask Nautobot GPT to create that job for me to go do that work. And at this point in time, it might not be 100% of the code that you would need to do that, but it's going to get you 90% of the way there. So think of it in these terms. You need a developer to write some custom code for you, and you probably estimate it's going to take 2 weeks to get that done. Now, by using Nautobot GPT, we might get that work done in a day, right? So I've rapidly accelerated the pace at which my team can do work. I can get things done a lot more quickly. And even some things I can do without needing developers at all, especially when it comes to reporting. So now my managers or my folks that need information to do forecasting, for example, can get those detailed, complex reports just by conversing with Nautobot GPT and getting that information back. So
Yeah.
interesting use cases here. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, and I want to just talk a bit more about how easy it is to interact with these agents, because when you interact with these AI assistants, because when you have a quicker time to understand what's going on, when I can understand the situation quicker, whatever that situation may be, now I can act on it quicker. So in my day-to-day life, these AI assistants can speed up my understanding of the network, understanding how to fix the network, how fast I can code, for example, creating Nautobot jobs through Nautobot GPT, it can speed that up tremendously by days and days. So I can get to a working automation in a matter of hours versus days or weeks. I'm curious to see what the trough of disillusionment is going to look like for network AI assistants, because right now I see a capable technology. I see well-defined use cases. I'm not sure how much time this is going to spend in the trough of disillusionment or how deep that trough is going to be. I think Gartner's spot on here. These are going to speed through that. I think they're going to hit that plateau of productivity easily within 2 years.
Yeah, I imagine the only speed bump I could see in the way in on the path is something that Tim and I have been exploring on the Automation Loop series, which is just how does AI work, and the fact that it is inherently unpredictable, and that the outcomes aren't always what you would anticipate them to be. And so I could imagine that might be a bit of a speed bump that might lag us down in that trough of disillusionment, especially if you get burned by that in your environment, perhaps. But I think what we're seeing now is the guardrails being built around these AI assistants such that we can minimize that unpredictability. But that might, to me, is the only possible area where we might have a hiccup there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that trough of disillusionment might be characterized by people getting burned by some, we'll call it non-deterministic behavior that AIs often exhibit,
Yeah.
for sure.
And I would say, I know before Tim and I started doing research on the way AI actually works under the hood, it was something that we really didn't fully understand. You know, we heard these ideas, we heard these concepts, but we didn't really get the details. And while, you know, we're never going to be AI developers, we do want to make sure we understand the concepts. I think it's very similar to the idea in my mind of, hey, it's important to know how to do basic arithmetic, not just know how to use a calculator. And I think it's very, very similar idea, like understanding, you know, that 2 + 2 = 4, and what does that actually mean? Not just I plunk some numbers into a calculator and got an answer. So really understanding those nuances is something we've been exploring, and I hope that you are as well, because I think it's important for us as we begin to embrace this new technology to understand how it works and how it doesn't work is probably even more important.
Yeah, I think that trough of disillusionment might also be characterized by firms struggling to get the right guardrails in place to guard against this non-deterministic behavior, to mitigate
Yeah.
it, to make sure it happens less. And I'm going to also just trace back to Nautobot on that. Having a good, clean source of data for that AI to draw upon reduces the amount of guessing that has to do. It reduces the likelihood that it's going to hallucinate an answer for you. The AI having a good source will provide some nice guardrails around that AI.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay. Let's move on to the fourth and last innovation that we're going to talk about today. So this is Agentic NetOps, currently in the innovation trigger, very, very at the very beginning of the hype cycle. So we're seeing here, you know, 5 to 10 years out, according to Gartner. And when we talk about Agentic NetOps, what we mean is that we have these goal-driven autonomous AI agents that are equipped with their own memory, planning, sensing to basically manage network tasks independently within, you know, your given defined organizational policy. And as I think about that and I say those words out loud, to be honest, from what I know about AI right now, that is terrifying to me when I think about that, right? Particularly where AI is today, the more that I've learned about it. So, Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's look at the description here, the definition here. We're seeing words like autonomous, independently. Uh, that is interesting to me. And it's interesting to me because we just talked about non-deterministic behavior. And I think there's non-deterministic behavior, but then there's non-deterministic behavior at scale when something is supposed to be autonomous and independent. As management, that would really grab my attention and perhaps give me a little pause here. That's why I think they're spot on with this 5 to 10 years for adoption. I think the trust is going to have to be there. And I think we're going to spend a lot of time in the trough of disillusionment, because now we're not just saying, tell me about the network, assist me in doing something, AI. We're saying, AI, go do this thing for me independently and autonomously. You are putting a lot of trust in that AI. So you want to have guardrails and protections against this non-deterministic behavior. Certainly. Now, And I also want to just point out how this folds into the prior topic. We just talked about AI assistants, but let's fold agentic NetOps into that, meaning I may talk to an AI assistant and say, hey, AI assistant, tell me about this part of the network. Under the hood, the AI assistant may have an agent that's specially designed to be good at getting information on what you just asked for. So in a sense, agentic NetOps is making your AI assistant more powerful, and you're able to give it more skills through these specialized agents it can draw upon. All that being said, this non-deterministic behavior, I think we're going to be hearing that a lot more, especially when we hit the trough of disillusionment. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. I would say, first, and for any of those of you out there that are, maybe you're agreeing or disagreeing with us, feel free to hit us with some questions on this. We can reach those as we get to the Q&A. But, as Tim was saying, what we're seeing is that AI is absolutely non-deterministic, and now we're going to send it out there to go do its own work. That means we're going to have to make a lot of progress on the AI front to ensure that that these agents are doing what we want them to do, that they're not hallucinating and inventing things that they decide they want to do on their own, which we have seen AI do, right? We have seen that happen. We see the news articles of these types of things happening. In fact, Tim and I have even covered some of these in our automation loop series of these unexpected events where, a database got deleted, for example. Horrifying event, right? Particularly if that's your database and your production database gone. So how do we think about this? How do we get that to that level where we can start to really trust it and rely on it? And one of the key elements is absolutely going to be feeding good, clean data into these tools. And that's, again, where we see this idea of Nautobot in the world, and preparing and planning for this. That is getting our teams used to this idea of maintaining data, maintaining clean data, and keeping it accurate. This is something we need the humans to do. And it is different from the way we behave today. And so this is where we're getting back to that paradigm shift. Like, if we're going to embrace these concepts and we want to use these ideas in the future, we have to start planning now. So even though we see, hey, it's 5 to 10 years out before agentic NetOps is reaching that plateau of productivity, realistically speaking, it's probably going to take you 5 to 10 years to be ready for it, to be really honest. So now's the time to start planning. You do not want to wait. Because it is going to take a while. It is absolutely a journey to shift your team from CLI or UI-driven management to something that is absolutely intent-based driven, that enables these ideas of both network automation, NetDevOps, and finally something like agentic NetOps.
Yeah, and Tim, let's help me break this down here. So Nautobot is a source of clean data. We're arguing that clean data is a strategic asset. So let's defend that for a moment. Clean data from Nautobot enables network automation. It's required for NetDevOps. It's required for AI, both for training and for augmenting your AI with additional information and context about what it's supposed to be doing. What am I missing there? Am I missing anything?
It really enables all of these modern concepts that we see, whether it's a digital twin or any of the other innovation features that we see here. They all fundamentally rely on good, clean data about your environment. That is the expression of intent in the data. Yep.
Yeah. So in other words, we just want to point out clean data matters. It is strategic. That is what we're saying. And if you're talking to us about engaging with us, we're almost always going to start with your data story, because your data story unlocks everything else. All these technologies we're talking about here today.
It reminds me of you're building a house or you're renovating your house, and we care about the nice new shiny bathroom or the pristine kitchen. But if you don't have a solid foundation under that house, that shiny bathroom and that nice new kitchen does not matter, right? Like, we have to spend time on the boring stuff that holds up the whole house. And that's really, really critical here when we think of these new things that are coming. We've absolutely got to have the right foundation in place. Which actually brings me to the next slide, which is Nautobot as that foundation. So now that we've seen those technologies as they rise through the hype and mature cycle, we want to say, like, how do we prepare? How do we take full advantage of these innovations as they happen? And this is where Nautobot comes in, helping you turn those innovations into reality in your environment. So at its core, Nautobot is a network source of truth. That is absolutely its core fundamental components. It gives us a place to centralize and validate our network data, so you can always know what's deployed and what's running. We can automate routine tasks to free your team from higher value projects. So that's getting us right into that network automation stuff that is already out of the hype cycle and is reaching those production level items as we see now. We can easily integrate new tools and technologies, whether they're AI-driven network insights or digital twins or advanced NetDevOps workflows. So basically, Nautobot doesn't just help you keep up, it gives you the platform to lead and leverage emerging technologies with confidence. And that's really the key foundation on which we're building all of our future plans on and from. Now, within Nautobot, we have some offerings here. It isn't just a platform, it's a flexible ecosystem. So you have multiple ways in which you can leverage the network automation foundation. First, starting off with Nautobot and Nautobot support. So Nautobot, the core platform, when you pair it with the support from NTC, ensures you have the tools and the guidance you need to manage your network effectively. Now, of course, a lot of organizations, hey, your job is to run the network. You aren't here to run applications. And that's where Nautobot Cloud comes in. So hey, stop wasting time on running an application. Focus on what your core business is that's running the network. Let us handle the infrastructure management piece. That's where Nautobot Cloud comes in. It's the easy button when it comes to Nautobot. We handle all of the hard, heavy lift of deploying Nautobot and keeping it up and running, making sure that it's highly available, that it's running all of its backups and all of those kinds of maintenances, all of the patch levels. Hey, am I patched? Am I up to date? Et cetera, all handled for you. You just use Nautobot and leverage it to actually manage your environment. And then Nautobot GPT, as we alluded to earlier, this is really the next generation of the Nautobot environment where I'm able to interact with my Nautobot system via the Nautobot Cloud application where I get access to Nautobot GPT. So whether you want full control on your own with an on-prem deployment and you go with just straight up Nautobot and Nautobot support, or if you want those hands-off cloud operations methods here, we're here to help you, right? So we've got various methods on which we can deploy into these environments for you. Okay, let's move into the Q&A. So we've got a few questions coming in for us. Feel free if you've thought of any others as well. Here we've got a few minutes we'll spend here on the Q&A section. So definitely fire those away at us. So first one I've got here is related to the digital twin idea, which was how are you handling the missing functionality of virtual network devices that you would use if you're, say, doing a digital twin? So how would we handle that from a Nautobot or NTC perspective, I think is the question. So I'll give my thoughts here, and then Tim, if you have any to follow up on, feel free. But essentially, what you think of when you think of the Nautobot world and NTC philosophy is that we describe intent external to the device, as we mentioned earlier, right? So we do that in Nautobot. And we do that potentially with a tool that we call Design Builder. Design Builder gives us a way to describe how our network looks in a very structured format. It allows us to use templates and nest those templates so we can kind of build up from the bottom up as far as the way we create the design. What happens when we do that is it means that the design is vendor neutral. So I can then take that design and output it into the appropriate format. So whether it's Cisco or Arista or whatever. And I think your question gets at that a lot of times in our digital twins, they may not one-for-one map all of the feature sets that I have in the real world. And there's certain things I just can't deploy. And that's where this intended state design comes in, where I'm able to say, hey, I'm deploying into the digital twin. Therefore, I'm not going to deploy the features that are not supported in the digital twin compared to the real world. So I have that intended state, and then I translate that into the digital twin configuration. And that happens on the Nautobot platform, right? So I have this capability to create these kind of translations from the intended state into the appropriate vendor syntax and or my digital twin syntax. So that's the basic idea there. Tim, any follow-up comments from your side? If not, it's okay. We'll move to the next question.
Yeah, I do. I have a couple thoughts here. I think what part of also he was getting at was that, hey, virtual devices, I have a virtual twin, but my virtual devices don't do everything that a real device in my network would do. How do I deal with that? And that's part of why I think that this is going to take a long time. And Gartner thinks this is going to take 5 to 10 years to come to fruition because there's so much nuances there between the physical device and the virtual device. I think with digital twins, the goal has to be reducing risk. You will not eliminate it. So going with that in mind, you have to focus on risk reduction, not risk elimination, because to the questioner's point, I think it was Joseph, to Joseph's point, you're not going to be able to model some stuff. And we talked about this earlier. There's just, and Gartner even talks about this in the report. It's hard to do good virtual twins, comprehensive virtual twins at least, because of this missing functionality that the questioner was referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a follow-up question here from another of our attendees here today about the digital twin, which is, how are we testing traffic patterns, traffic loads? Does Nautobot have any solutions around this? So to be clear, Nautobot is not a digital twin tool. Nautobot is the way in which you feed the configuration into your digital twin tool. So you would absolutely still have your digital twin tool, which would be handling those aspects, right? So that's not something that Nautobot does. What Nautobot does is set up the configuration of that digital twin, so you don't have to go do that multiple times. Go ahead, Tim, if you had any further thoughts.
Yeah,
there.
I don't have anything to add there. That was a good explanation.
Yeah. We got another one here is, what is the Nautobot free version for the community versus the official one? So great question. So Nautobot Core is released under Apache 2 and is open source, and you will see that that is available out in the Git repo. There is no difference between that code and what we provide in Nautobot Cloud. So there is no distinction between those code. What you will see, though, available in Nautobot Cloud, for example, the official one, if you will, as you put, is really the addition of non-open source applications that we layer on top. So there is a very large ecosystem of free open source applications that are available as part of the project. The Golden Config application is one of them, for example, our #1 most popular app. But others, like, for example, our OS Upgrades app, that's a way in which you can handle your vendor-neutral approach, single pane of glass, into all of your OS upgrades across the vast majority of your devices. So whether it's Cisco, Arista, Juniper, F5, Palo Alto, all supported out of the box to do your OS upgrades. That is an example of an application that is not part of our free open source code. That would be something you would get by signing up for Nautobot Cloud, for example. So that would be the distinction there. There are some apps that are not open source. Currently, the vast majority are open source. So great question. Thank you for that. All right, let's see. I think we got maybe one more question here, which would be, how often should organizations revisit or realign their strategy based on where technologies move within the hype cycle? Any thoughts on that one, Tim? If not, I can take it. No worries.
Yeah, excuse me. That's a really insightful question. I like that. So, excuse me, I'm having trouble here speaking. But yeah, I think with this one, it really depends on your risk, on your risk strategy. And also it depends on your capabilities. And we talked about earlier, there's a cultural component to these changes as well. NetDevOps is a big cultural change. Some of these other ones are a smaller cultural change, but they're still changes. How quickly can your organization adapt to these changes and leverage them effectively? That matters, because NetDevOps, that can impact the structure of your entire organization. Whereas Agentic, AI assistants, that might have a more local impact, but more immediate. So I think it depends on the use cases and your organization and your risk strategy. Thoughts?
Yep. I agree. I concur.
Okay.
We got one more question coming in here right at the last minute. Can you describe the digital twin in relation with Nautobot? So something I'm finding interesting is that when we did the poll at the beginning, very few of you were interested in digital twins, but yet a lot of the questions we're getting are asking about digital twin. So perhaps it's that there's not a good understanding of digital twins out there right now, and that might have a lot to do with Gartner even putting it way early in the hype cycle as well. Is that it really is an emerging technology and it isn't really fully fleshed out yet. So digital twin. This is the tool that actually powers your virtual network, if you will. So we need a place that can actually spin up and model your network. And it probably needs to be a multi-vendor solution, right? So that is, I need a tool that can handle spinning up my Cisco routers and my Arista switches and my Palo Alto firewalls and my F5 load balancers, whatever I might have in my environment. So I need to be able to model all those different devices in a software world. And that's what digital twins do. What Nautobot does is provide the configuration of those virtual devices. So when I spin up, hey, a Cisco router in there, it has no configuration. It's got to come from somewhere. And we want it to look like the real world. So that's where Nautobot comes in, providing that configuration for the digital twin environment, if you will. So you could think of the digital twin, it's literally just a copy of your real network, but that doesn't happen by magic. That configuration comes from somewhere. It can come from Nautobot. Let's see. Okay, I think we might have one more question here. Are you selling cloud apps for on-prem installation too? You can absolutely reach out to us on the sales team and we can work with you on that. So definitely reach out to us if you're interested in any of the apps, say like the OS upgrade one that I mentioned. Definitely reach out to us and we can definitely find a way to make sure that you can take advantage of that, even if you're using an on-prem deployment. So yes, please reach out. Okay, I'm going to move into our wrap up here, as well as I've got a really cool link for you coming up here. So just definitely hang tight with me. Some key takeaways, right? So consider investments that you're thinking about for the next 12 to 24 months and how you're going to position your team for success. And really keeping in mind, hey, Nautobot's going to enable adoption of these key innovations as you think to the future. So here's just a quick recap of the things that we went through today. We really took a look at that Gartner Hype Cycle. What does it mean? How does it work? Hopefully you gain some insights there and you'll be able to start leveraging it in your everyday use now as you think about maybe your quarterly planning. Look at some of those key innovations we see in that deep dive and then how Nautobot maps to those, and then your key takeaways here. So as we look to the future, this is something we'll be doing on these webinars regularly, is just kind of looking at the hype cycle and understanding, what's the value that Gartner's bringing to us as we move forward there. So if you don't have access to the Gartner Hype Cycle report for enterprise networking, we're going to give you a link so that you can get a complimentary copy of it today. It's a really interesting read and got a lot of great insights coming to us from Gartner. They put a tremendous amount of effort into this, so pretty cool there, as well as we've dropped some links for you as far as how to reach out to us if you don't have those links already. So thanks for attending and happy automating. And if you're ready to take that next step, again, please reach out to us. And if otherwise, we look forward to seeing you again on a future webinar. And with that, I'm Tim.
And I'm Tim.
And happy automating.